The globe has just been subjected to an economic bomb by Russia, and that bomb is food.
Yes, if you were under the impression that food costs were declining and that inflation was decreasing, I regret to inform you that this is not the case. Among its many natural resources are staple cereals including corn, wheat, rice, oats, and barley. Russia is one of the world's most resource-rich nations. It turns out that these staple grains are among the most exported from Russia. But since the world's worst sanctions were placed on Russia by the US and Europe, Russia is unable to export these commodities, which is raising the price of these grains. However, Ukraine is still a major exporter of grains, and despite the fact that many of its towns are in ruins, it exports to every country in the world. And there would be a catastrophic famine in many Latin American, African, and Middle Eastern nations if Ukraine stopped selling these commodities.
However, as of a few weeks ago, Russia has abruptly ceased exporting grain from Ukraine. That's correct, all grain leaving Ukraine over the Black Sea is under Russian control.
Since the world depends on these grains, Russia, Turkey, and the UN signed an agreement in 2022 allowing Ukraine to export them. However, the president of Russia has now chosen to end that contract and is going to cause two disasters. A fresh wave of inflation is the first, and starvation in the world's poorest nations, including those in Latin America, is the second. We do not prioritize food production in a time when the majority of people on the planet are overweight.
In the modern era, food has been abundant due to technological advancements.
But the most significant thing in history was food.
Food was the catalyst for wars, revolutions, and the toppling of regimes.
Today, Russia and Ukraine are the two nations that produce the majority of the world's food.
That's right, it's estimated that 1 in 8 calories come from Russia and Ukraine.
In this graph you will see that 64% of all sunflower oil, almost 25% of all wheat, 19% of barley, and 18% of wheat originate from Russia and Ukraine. However, these numbers only depict a portion of the truth. It turns out that in terms of fundamental grain production, nations like the US, Brazil, Canada, and Germany are self-sufficient. These nations are unaffected when there is a shortage of these crops or an increase in price.
However, the great majority of nations are forced to import these grains, and as a result, their economies suffer greatly when prices rise.
Particularly in Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East is this the case. Additionally, an emergency is about to break out in some countries. For instance, Egypt's food stocks are only enough to last 2.3 months, and its inflation rate is currently between 25 and 35%. Another example is Pakistan, where food supplies last for 3 months and inflation ranges from 30 to 40%. As you can see, those are sizable and significant nations, but numerous more nations exhibit similar characteristics.
Here in this graph you will see the countries that are highly dependent on food from Russia and Ukraine.
The countries in blue are the largest producers in the world that are not dependent on imports, while those in other colors are highly dependent on Russia and Ukraine. Additionally, the cost of all foods increased beyond all previous levels when the conflict between Russia and Ukraine erupted. This was undoubtedly brought on by rumors that Russia and Ukraine would be unable to produce those grains, but it was also a result of the sanctions that were put in place. This was a serious issue.
Russia gained control over all food shipments via the Black Sea ports by conquering Ukraine. As a result, Russia gained exclusive control over commerce in Russian and Ukrainian staple cereals.
Additionally, the unprecedented sanctions imposed on Russia by the United States and Europe led to a worldwide emergency, prompting the UN to intervene in an attempt to safeguard the food supply. Russia, Turkey, and the UN came to an agreement in 2022 allowing Ukraine to keep exporting staple cereals alongside Russia. As a result, there was a sigh of relief for the global economy and food prices stabilized. To everyone's amazement, however, Putin terminated this arrangement in July 2023, causing a worldwide emergency. If you are enjoying this video and want to be aware of new videos, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications.
Regarding its core grain exports, Russia has Ukraine cornered. Almost the whole Ukrainian Black Sea coastline is currently under the naval force of the Russian military, blocking imports and exports. The world is also in a frenzy today that Russia has violated the deal permitting Ukrainian grain exports abroad.
Famine in many of the nations that import these grains as well as rising inflation would be the immediate consequences of this food catastrophe.
Why would there be another increase in inflation?
The price of all grains worldwide rises as a result of the prohibition on the export of Ukrainian grains, since these fundamental grains are present in practically all store food goods.
There is no way this situation can continue. The global impact of a humanitarian and economic catastrophe might be catastrophic.
As a result, international nations need to bargain and reach a deal with Russia.
Putin has made a cunning move, but it's still a wise one.
According to Putin, the Ukrainians are exploiting this arrangement for financial gain, while the West is abusing it. According to him, these grain exports ought to be used as humanitarian help in the most impoverished nations. He claims, however, that just 4% of Ukraine's grain exports got to those nations, the remainder went straight to other, wealthier nations, boosting Ukrainian exports once more. Furthermore, Putin claims that the agreement included the lifting of Western sanctions against Russian foodstuffs and fertilizers, which the West has only grudgingly carried out.
Russia has so chosen to breach the deal since it has not been receiving the promises that Western nations have given to it. As one could expect, the West is forced to bargain as a result of Putin's action.
Russia's biggest challenge at the moment is the sanctions put in place by the West and the financial and military assistance provided to Ukraine. And while it is true that this will have an impact on many nations and most likely cause a famine, the West will not experience one of them. As I showed you on the map, these are the countries that import the most grain from Ukraine. As you will see, the vast majority are in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. Unfortunately, these regions are not of much importance to the United States and Europe.
As a result, Putin has little negotiating leverage. Putin is currently under a great deal of criticism for violating the grain export deal.
Several Middle Eastern and African nations have harshly condemned Putin and urged him to end the conflict. Additionally, a conference between Russia and African nations took place a few weeks ago. Given that Africa is the continent most impacted by the Ukrainian grain embargo, many nations boycotted the summit in protest of the war in Ukraine. Additionally, Putin came under heavy fire.
It was unexpected how Putin responded. He promised to provide free grains to Africa's most impoverished countries. However, the specifics are how many and to whom.
It turns out that Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, the Central African Republic, and Eritrea are the nations that will get these grains.
50,000 tons of grain will be sent to each of these nations. Sadly, 50,000 tons is insignificant.
These nations all require at least 6 times that amount.
Thus, this short-lived free grain is Putin's weapon. It won't continue long because grain from Ukraine is equally necessary for China. Yes, China is the country that imports the most grain from Ukraine. China will therefore be the one to bring about order again and solve the global issues of hunger and growing prices. China and Putin are great friends, and China will act as the go-between for negotiations between the West and Russia. Furthermore, this is ideal for China. China hopes to become the global superpower that shapes global trends. China wants to be known as a nation that finds peaceful, humane solutions to issues, and this is the ideal setting for China to achieve that goal. That brings me to the big question I have for you. Do you think China will solve this problem with Russia, or do you think it will get worse and we will see a global food crisis? Leave us your opinion in the comments.